Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. I am your host, Gershwin, and you are watching One Mind Syndicate. Today we continue talking about Forge Worlds as we get into Zhao Arkhad. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. We post Warhammer 40K content every single day. And of course, if you have any suggestions for topics of Warhammer 40K, just comment down below and we'll try to create a video for you. With that said, let's get into 40 facts on Zhao Arkhad. Zhao Arkhad is a forge world of the Adeptus Mechanicus, as well as a death world that sits at the heart of its own small stellar empire. Much of the knowledge of Zhao Arkhad is based on the data recovered by the Metallicum Mechanicum during the Great Scouring, and even these records are cursory and fragmentary at best. Hence, the specifics of the forge world's curious history, especially its beginnings, remains unknown. What is certain is that Zhao Arkhad was initially founded by the Mechanicum Ark Expedition, heralding from Sacred Mars itself. The time frame of its inception is still debated among scholars, but is generally agreed upon as falling in the latter years of the Dark Age of technology. To reach their final destination, the Mechanicum Ark must have been flung wildly off course from its intended target. What lore remains indicates that a powerful warp storm was responsible for wrecking the Ark's warp drives, as well as damaging its more conventional engines, thus prompting an emergency translation back into real space. When the Mechanicum Ark re-entered reality, be it by the hand of fate or blind luck, it was amid the uncharted and unknown stars of the deep galactic south. Orbiting a white star, the system they had emerged in counted numerous minor volcanically active planets, gas giants, and thick webs of asteroid belts, but only one green world capable of harboring life. That any world within range of the stricken Ark was habitable was viewed as a miracle by many colonists. Calculating that this world offered their only chance at survival, the Mechanicum Ark limped towards its destination, gathering more information as it closed in with the planet. Its atmosphere, harbored oxygen, and the 3 moons orbiting it were determined to possess heavy mineral concentrations, making it suitable for settlement and offering the opportunity for potential expansion. Full of confidence, the colonists named their new system Zhao and landed their craft on the new world. It was only after landing that the colonists realized that their new haven was a blighted one. Fate had delivered them onto a death world. The tropical world boasted an atmospheric oxygen level far above the Terran norm, while local flora and fauna quickly proved highly toxic for any augmented human. The prevailing climate was that of a tropical rainforest, with wildly fluctuating temperatures and ceaseless rainfall, which brought humidity to severe levels. These harsh atmospheric conditions left the colonists with little choice but to remain in those sections of their forced-landed Ark and its cargo holds that could be fully airlocked and were able to shield them from Zhao Arkhad's weather. The first parties to venture outside the downed vessel soon testified to their new homeworld's ability to sustain life. Grossly enlarged fauna that grew at a speed seldom seen and an extensive population of monstrously large arthropods provided a snapshot of the planet's hostile ecosystem. From the outset, the aggressive level of these beasts threatened the very existence of the colony, and if it had not been for the handful of titans that had survived in the Ark's holds, the colonists' survival would have been impossible. Thus began the Titans' unceasing Iron Vigil, which would later become the name of the Legos Zistobais, the Forge World's most powerful protectors. To the colonists of Zhao Arkhad, it must have seemed as if the fertile world consciously resisted every attempt at colonization. The myriad different species of trees formed a dense canopy that led through little sunlight, but at the same time, these trees were so tall that they reached above the cloud level, which meant that the storms and monsoon rains formed directly over the colonists' heads, the foliage of the canopy further trapping the humidity below, causing intense corrosion that reached previously unseen levels. Even when the colonists tried to cut these trees down, the oxygen-rich atmosphere and the increased sunlight let the ground erupt with new saplings, the forest growing even thicker in the short-lived clearings made by the colonists, where the canopy grew so thick as to entirely block the rays of Zhao's star. Great macro-predators made their lairs, and the ferociousness of these beasts ensured that the colonist titans never ran out of targets. The only human edible produce of Zhao Arkhad proved to be a tuber, and even this had to be boiled and filtered repeatedly for many solar hours before it could be consumed with no or few ill effects. But even with Zhao Arkhad trying to kill them, the human colonist held on, as mankind has always done and will continue to do. The colonists of Zhao Arkhad forged their home through adversity, driven by their own iron faith in the Omnissiah and the Martian doctrine of unceasing labor. Quickly realizing that expansion across Zhao Arkhad's surface would be futile, the colonists decided to live beneath the ground, where the atmosphere could be more easily regulated and they would be safe from the predators of Zhao Arkhad's macrofauna. Using the deteriorating shell of their colony ark as cover, deep access shafts were cut into the subsurface, allowing colonists to abandon the cannibalized wreckage of their starship and start a new existence deep below the surface. This venture marked the foundation of the world's first Forge Fane. Others would eventually follow, as painstaking expeditions were sent out into the wild, braving the dangers of the rainforests, exploring new regions, and sinking new biomes and Forge Fanes into the ground. As the first Forge Fanes slowly became functional, the worker caste was granted new technologies that allowed them to complete their work with greater speed and efficiency. Each standard year, more Forge Fanes were founded, and within the space of one Terran century, Zhao Arkhad reached the ranks of a fully self-sustained Forge world. To mark this occasion, the world's planetary governor, now bearing the newly created title of Supreme Domini of the Zhao Arkhad, announced the start of the First Conjunction, a period of time during which the Forge world would aim towards becoming fully equipped and functional, a golden age of economic expansion that allowed Zhao Arkhad to grow strong. As part of the First Conjunction, the settlers of Zhao Arkhad not only limited their ambitions to just the development of their world, but also turned their gaze skyward. The 3 moons orbiting Zhao Arkhad, which were designated Arkhad 1, 2, and 3, harbored welcome mineral resources that Forge worlds needed desperately to grow and evolve. With this goal in mind, permanent mining bases were established on each moon. To reach them, the first transorbital spacecrafts were manufactured from repurposed materials drawn from the remains of the Mechanicum arc and powered using simple hydrogen torch engines. As exploitation began on Zhao Arkhad's moon, it was quickly deemed more efficient to harbor much of the labor force on lunar colonies rather than Zhao Arkhad itself. The First Conjunction would last for an entire Terran millennia before it was declared complete by the Office of the Supreme Domini. By its own accord, each Forge Fane was now considered fully operational, while the population of the servile workers in their lunar bases had risen into the hundreds of thousands. Each generation of workers totally devoted to generating resources for their masters' use below. The Supreme Domini and the governing Magister Locum of every Forge Fane had long awaited the announcement of the First Conjunction's completion, and had already laid out the objectives of their second phase of expansion, the Second Conjunction. Unknowingly, Zhao Arkhad had entered its last years of prosperity. With the lunar transportation fleet now numbering dozens of transportation barracks and shuttles, the influx of raw materials extracted from the lunar colonies permitted the Forge Fanes to expand and research new and more efficient technologies. Yet this was still not enough for the tech adepts to achieve their desired ends. While useful, the materials extracted from the lunar colonies lacked the essential properties needed to develop the more advanced technologies each Forge Fane secretly or openly coveted. In particular, the moons lacked void-worthy material that would allow the domains of Zhao Arkhad to grow beyond their own orbit and let them claim the entire Zhao system and its untapped resources. A first step to achieving this goal was to settle and claim the neighboring volcanic world of Nitos. To ensure that the effort expended on this venture would not be in vain, the Magi of Zhao Arkhad launched a new space program to send unmanned survey probes to Nitos. What these probes found confirmed that the Magi's suspicion. Nitos did harbor the rare elements desired by the Forge Fanes. With the lunar colonies rapidly reaching the limits of their production, the necessary surplus population for a grand settlement expedition existed, and so the colonization of Nitos was fixed as the first great target of Zhao Arkhad's second conjunction. Reaching the goals of the second conjunction was no easy task. While the lunar colonies had yielded welcoming mineral wealth, none of the moons harbored any of the specialist materials necessary to build additional long-range spacecraft. As Zhao Arkhad had already consumed all the void-worthy materials from their original Mechanicum Arc for the construction of their lunar transport fleet and a small conveyor fleet, the Magi were faced with a difficult decision. In the end, military considerations tipped the balance, and it was decided that several transport barges would be wrecked and that their materials used for the creation of a single explorer vessel, which would transport up to 20,000 colonists to their new home. For this purpose, the hydrotorch engines of the lunar barges would be linked into great reactor blocks to allow the vessel to break free of the grip of Zhao Arkhad's gravity. The explorer's atmospheric pressure system and life support were equally boosted to allow the ship and its crew to survive the estimated 6 solar months of travel unscathed. Most of the ship was crafted from salvaged materials, all of which had suffered from some level of corrosion due to the oxygen and humidity-rich surface on which the Ark had landed, or had been freshly forged from far more common ores with lesser strength. The Nitos expedition was led by the Forge Domini of the Zhao Arkhad's primary Forge Fane, who would personally command and maintain the ship while en route to Nitos. The launch of the Nitos Explorer vessel, whose name was unrecorded or was perhaps purged from the official records, was declared a major success. Across the Zhao Arkhad's lunar colonies, those servile workers chosen to be part of the expedition were celebrated as blessed in the sight of the machine god. Many festivities were organized as the vessel departed on its voyage. For the first 3 solar months of its trip, everything went according to plan. But about halfway to their intended goal, the rear of the vessel was struck by a meteorite no more than 2 centimeters in diameter. Weakened by the corrosive effects of Zhao Arkhad's atmosphere, the hull proved incapable of withstanding such a minor strike, and the impact initiated a chain reaction of ruptures that led to an explosive decompression of the vessel's interior, exposing the colonists to the fatal vacuum of the void. In a matter of a few solar minutes, Zhao Arkhad's great venture had turned to a disaster. The loss of Nitos' explorer vessel was the first great crisis encountered by the Forge Fanes of Zhao Arkhad, and many were those who secretly blamed the Supreme Domini for it. Fearing the adverse effects that the news of this tragic accident might have on the servile worker caste, which severely outnumbered the Magi, the loss of the expeditionary vessel was deliberately kept secret for fear the heavily indoctrinated and religious workers might see the vessel's loss as an ill omen, or even worse, the judgment of the machine god upon their masters. Still in need of new resources for its planned expansion, Zhao Arkhad turned its attention to mining the asteroid field, far less rich than Nitos had been, but closer and more readily accessible. However, the cruel hand of fate was not quite done with Zhao Arkhad, or as the ancient Terran proverb says, disasters never come alone. Shortly after the Nitos disaster, the Zhao system was increasingly plagued by immaterial turbulence and warp storms, the like of which had stranded the Mechanicum Arc on Zhao Arkhad in the first place. Strange events grew widespread among the lunar colonies, from otherwise harmless strange glowing lights or auras that haunted the tunnels and caverns of the deep forge fanes and the lunar mines, to infrequent occurrences of warp entity possession or sudden insanity. Most affected were those of the worker caste who unknowingly manifested the Psyker gift, becoming suddenly aware of the emergence of Psykers in their midst. The Magi of Zhao Arkhad, and especially those of the Imnari Forge Fane, began to see them as an interesting new research subject, but would not yet act upon it. This would soon change, for with the warp storms came the first predations of Xeno-Corsairs, believed to belong to the Eldar race. The Corsairs' attention was drawn to the lunar colonies and the void stations established in the asteroid belt, but curiously never touched Zhao Arkhad itself. However, the Magi knew that they could not survive without their workers and the resources they generated, and fiercely sought to protect these from the Corsairs' baleful attention. The Supreme Domini declared that all efforts should now be concentrated on the defense of the Servial colonies and off-world outposts. This edict is known to have bred particular discontent amongst the Forge Fanes, as the central authority of the Supreme Domini began to assert itself and require ever greater portions of the Forge Fanes' wealth and resources to be directed to military needs. Soon discontent voices began to murmur that the Xenos' deprivation was a visual sign that the Omnissiah had turned his gaze from the Supreme Domini for his failures. It was during these years of continued militarization of the Forge World's production that the Imanari Forge Fane grew to prominence. All over Zhao Arkhad, some few Forge Fanes had begun to apply reclamation protocols to the gears and bodies of their enemies, all with the tactical approval of the Supreme Domini, who believed that at the end, the survival of the Forge World would justify the means. As such, Xeno weaponry and materials were soon given new purpose by strengthening Zhao Arkhad's ever-growing arsenal, a practice that would justly be considered as a perversion of the sacred design of the Omnissiah on every other Mechanicum Forge world. This was, however, not enough for the Imanari, who chose to tread down an even darker path. Petition by Magos Tacticus Proctor of the Imanari Forge Fane, the Supreme Domini allowed the Forge Fane to requisition and experiment on the emergent psyker population of the lunar colonies. The Magos Proctor's goal was to replicate the precognitive skills some of the psykers had manifested, thus greatly increasing the potency of Zhao Arkhad's defenses. While replication naturally proved difficult to achieve, some measure of success was met by augmenting the cerebral cortexes of battle automatons with a synthetic, mapped neural network and harvested cortical material, which increased the automaton's responsiveness and seemed to grant near precognitive levels of response time to threat stimuli. The fact that such techno-arcana had long been prescribed by the Mechanicum since the fall of the Old Knight seemed not to have hindered the Imanari Forge in pursuing its researches and standing as a testimony to the extreme deviation in doctrine that had occurred on the isolated Forge world. Properly impressed with the abilities of these new cybernetic cortexes, the Supreme Domini declared that each colony would be provided with these Imanari hybrid battle automatons, as well as the base combat models assembled in the Chiari Forge Fanes, while other Forge Fanes contributed in other ways to the defense of Arcada 1, 2, and 3, be it through the production of static gun emplacements, fortifications, or simple ammunition. An immediate decrease in damage inflicted and servile casualties caused was recorded in the raids of the Xenos Corsairs, making the Zhao Arkhad's defensive project as a great success for all of the Forge Fanes involved. Yet other Forge Fanes found that disproportionate attention was laid on the efforts of the Chiari and the Imanari Forges, with some even openly talking of favoritism from the Supreme Domini. This talk only masked the growing tension between these favored Forge Fanes and other forges of Zhao Arkhad. Even as Zhao Arkhad was forced to constantly face Xenos raids and other harrowing, otherworldly incursions, the Forge world began to tear itself apart in the interscene conflict that was later known as the Chiari Wars.